Case 1. Andrea Yates. June 20th, 2001. Houston, Texas, Harris County. The 911 call came into the Houston Police Department at 9:37 on the morning of June 20th, 2001. The woman's voice on the other end was eerily calm, almost robotic. "I need a police officer," she said. The dispatcher asked what was wrong. "I just killed my kids." The dispatcher, thinking this might be a prank or mental health crisis, asked for clarification. The woman, 36-year-old Andrea Yates, repeated herself with chilling clarity. "I killed my kids. All of them." When Houston police officers arrived at the modest suburban home on Beachcomber Lane in the Clear Lake area of Houston, Andrea met them at the door. Her hair was wet, water dripping down her face and clothes. Her expression was blank, empty. She showed no emotion as she led officers inside to what would become one of the most heartbreaking crime scenes in Texas history. In the master bathroom, floating face down in a bathtub still filled with water, was 7-year-old Noah Jacob Yates. On the bed in the master bedroom lay 4 other children, arranged side by side in a neat row: John Samuel, age 5, Paul Abraham, age 3, Luke David, age 2, and 6-month-old Mary Deborah. All 5 children were dead. Andrea had followed a methodical, horrifying pattern that morning. After her husband Rusty left for work at 9 o'clock, she filled the bathtub with 9 inches of water. One by one, she drowned each of her children, starting with 3-year-old Paul. She held each child face down in the water until they stopped struggling, until they stopped breathing. She drowned Paul, then 2-year-old Luke, then baby Mary. She laid each small body on the bed. Then she drowned 5-year-old John and placed him with his siblings. Finally, she went after 7-year-old Noah. Noah was old enough to understand what was happening. When he saw his mother coming for him, he ran. Andrea chased him through the house. She caught him and dragged him back to the bathroom. Noah fought for his life, but his mother was stronger. She held him under the water until he stopped moving. His body was too heavy for her to carry to the bed, so she left him floating in the tub. Then Andrea called 911. Then she called Rusty at work and told him, "You need to come home. It's time." "I did it." When officers asked Andrea why she killed her children, she told them simply, they weren't developing correctly. They were doomed to perish in the fires of hell. Andrea Yates had been suffering from severe postpartum psychosis, a rare but extremely dangerous mental illness that affects approximately 1 in 1,000 new mothers. This wasn't postpartum depression. This was a complete break from reality characterized by hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, and psychotic episodes. Andrea's mental health had been deteriorating for years. After the birth of her 4th son, Luke, in 1998, Andrea attempted to take her own life. She was hospitalized and diagnosed with major depression. She attempted self-harm again in 1999 and was placed on antipsychotic medication. But Andrea and her husband Rusty followed the teachings of a controversial religious minister named Michael Warrenecki, who preached that mental illness was a spiritual problem, not a medical one. Andrea went off her medications. Despite objections from her psychiatrist, she became pregnant again and gave birth to Mary in November 2000. After Mary's birth, Andrea's condition worsened dramatically. She suffered hallucinations. She heard voices. She became catatonic at times, unable to speak or move. She was hospitalized again and prescribed Haldol, a powerful antipsychotic medication. The Haldol helped, but in March 2001, her doctor discontinued it. By June, Andrea was experiencing severe religious delusions. She believed she was possessed by Satan. She believed her children would go to hell because she was a bad mother. She became convinced that the only way to save them was to kill them while they were still young and innocent, before they could be corrupted by her failures. On the morning of June 20th, Andrea acted on those delusions. Her first trial began in February 2002. The prosecution sought the death penalty. Andrea's defense team argued she was legally insane at the time of the killings, that she genuinely believed killing her children was the right thing to do, that she was saving them. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours and found Andrea guilty of capital murder. However, they sentenced her to life in prison rather than death. Andrea showed no reaction to the verdict. But in 2005, Andrea's conviction was overturned on appeal. A prosecution expert witness, Dr. Park Dietz, had testified about a law and order episode featuring a woman who drowned her children and was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The problem? That episode didn't exist. Dr. Dietz had provided false testimony. Andrea was retried in 2006. This time, the jury heard extensive testimony about her severe mental illness. Psychiatrists explained postpartum psychosis in detail. Andrea's medical records documenting her psychiatric hospitalizations, suicide attempts, and deteriorating mental health were presented. After deliberating for 13 hours, the jury reached a different conclusion: not guilty by reason of insanity. Andrea Yates was committed to Kerrville State Hospital, a maximum security psychiatric facility in Texas, where she remains today. She has been described by staff as a model patient who takes her medications, participates in therapy, and expresses deep remorse for what she did. The Yates case transformed the national conversation about postpartum mental health. It highlighted the devastating, deadly consequences when severe mental illness goes untreated. It sparked advocacy for better screening and support for new mothers experiencing psychiatric symptoms. Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary Yates deserved to grow up. They deserved futures, families of their own, long lives filled with joy and possibility. Instead, they died terrified in a bathtub, killed by the person they trusted most. The Andrea Yates case changed how America talks about postpartum mental illness. If you or someone you know is experiencing disturbing thoughts after childbirth, please seek help immediately. If you want to see more in-depth investigations like this, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for Cold Case Hour. Give this video a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. These stories need to be told. Case 2. Deanna Laney. May 9, 2003. New Chapel Hill, Texas, Smith County. It was nearly midnight in the small, rural community of New Chapel Hill, about 100 miles east of Dallas, when the call came into Smith County 911. A woman's voice, devoid of emotion, spoke words that would haunt dispatchers for years. "I've just killed my boys." The dispatcher asked what she meant. The woman, 38-year-old Deanna Laney, repeated herself. "I killed my boys. I need you to come. They're dead." When Smith County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Laney home, a secluded property surrounded by rural Texas land, they discovered a scene of unspeakable horror. In the front yard, under the dim glow of the porch light, lay the bodies of two young boys. 8-year-old Joshua Laney and 6-year-old Luke Laney were dead, their small bodies bearing massive trauma to their heads and faces. Nearby, barely clinging to life, was 14-month-old Aaron Laney. The baby had severe skull fractures and was struggling to breathe. The murder weapon lay scattered around the yard: rocks. Large rocks from the Laney property itself, some weighing as much as 40 pounds. Deanna had used these stones to bludgeon her 3 sons. Deanna was standing in the yard, covered in blood, when deputies arrived. She was calm. She confessed immediately. And what she told investigators would shock even seasoned law enforcement officers. "God told me to do it," Deanna said. "He told me to kill my boys." Deanna explained that she believed she was living in the end times, that the biblical apocalypse was imminent. She said God had been sending her messages for weeks, preparing her for something important. On the night of May 9th, she said God commanded her to take her 3 sons outside and kill them with stones, a test of her faith, like the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. Unlike Abraham, however, no angel intervened to stop her. According to Deanna's confession, she brought 8-year-old Joshua out first. She told him to lie down on the ground. Then she picked up a large rock and brought it down on his head repeatedly until he stopped moving. She repeated the process with 6-year-old Luke. When she brought baby Aaron outside, she struck him with a rock as well, fracturing his skull and leaving him critically injured. Deanna's husband, Keith Laney, was at work during the attacks. He returned home to find his wife covered in blood, 2 of his sons dead in the yard, and his youngest son barely alive. Emergency responders rushed Aaron to a local hospital and then airlifted him to Children's Medical Center in Dallas. Miraculously, Aaron survived, but he sustained permanent brain damage and disabilities that would affect him for the rest of his life. The community of New Chapel Hill, where everyone knew everyone, was devastated and confused. Deanna Laney was known as a devoted mother, an active member of the local Assembly of God Church, and a kind, caring person. She homeschooled her children. She took them to church every week. Nobody could understand what had happened. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Deanna had been experiencing what psychiatrists would later identify as religious delusions with command hallucinations. In the weeks before the murders, she had become increasingly obsessed with biblical prophecy and the end times. She told friends she believed she had been chosen by God for a special purpose. On the night of May 9th, Deanna genuinely believed God was speaking to her, commanding her to kill her children as a test of faith. In her fractured mind, she was being obedient to God's will. Deanna was charged with 2 counts of capital murder. Her trial began in March 2004. The central question: was Deanna Laney legally insane at the time she killed her sons? The defense presented testimony from multiple psychiatrists who evaluated Deanna. They diagnosed her with psychotic disorder with religious delusions. They explained that Deanna genuinely believed God had commanded her to kill her children and that she was incapable of understanding her actions were wrong. She believed she was doing the right thing, the godly thing. The prosecution argued that Deanna knew what she was doing was wrong. She had, after all, called 911 afterward. She had made statements suggesting she understood she would face consequences. They pushed for a murder conviction. After hearing weeks of psychiatric testimony, the jury deliberated for nearly 11 hours. They returned with a verdict: not guilty by reason of insanity. Deanna Laney was committed to North Texas State Hospital in Vernon, a maximum security psychiatric facility, where she would receive indefinite treatment. She would remain there until mental health professionals determined she was no longer a danger to herself or others. The verdict was controversial. Many in the community felt Deanna should have been convicted and sent to prison. They focused on the brutal deaths of Joshua and Luke, the permanent injuries to Aaron, and the devastation to the Laney family. But psychiatric experts testified that Deanna had no prior history of violence or mental health problems. She had experienced a sudden, severe psychotic break characterized by command hallucinations, a medical emergency that overrode her ability to think rationally. In 2012, a judge ruled that Deanna Laney could be released to outpatient treatment. Psychiatrists testified that with proper medication and supervision, Deanna was no longer a danger. The decision was met with outrage by some who believe she should remain hospitalized for life. Aaron Laney survived, but lives with significant cognitive and physical disabilities resulting from the attack. Keith Laney eventually remarried and rebuilt his life. The small community of New Chapel Hill continues to grapple with the tragedy that shattered so many families. Joshua and Luke Laney were buried together. They deserved to grow up, to play, to go to school, to experience life. Instead, their lives were cut short by a mother who believed she was obeying God. The Deanna Laney case shows us how religious delusions can be part of severe mental illness. If you or someone you know is experiencing disturbing thoughts they believe are from God or another source, please seek professional help immediately. Mental health crises are medical emergencies. If you're finding value in these investigations, show your support by subscribing to Cold Case Hour, hitting that like button, and turning on notifications. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Case 3, Dena Schlosser. November 22, 2004. Plano, Texas, Collin County. The call came into Plano police just after 2 in the afternoon on November 22, 2004. A neighbor at an apartment complex in Plano, a suburb north of Dallas, reported hearing a baby crying for an extended period. Then the crying stopped. Now there was only music, hymns playing loudly. Something felt wrong. When Plano police officers arrived at the apartment of 35-year-old Dena Schlosser, they knocked repeatedly. No response. They knocked again. Finally, the door opened. Dena stood in the doorway, covered in blood from head to toe. Her clothes were soaked. Blood dripped from her hands. But her face showed no distress, no panic. Instead, she wore a serene, peaceful expression. Gospel music played in the background. "I gave her to God," Dena said calmly. Officers pushed past Dena and entered the apartment. What they discovered was a scene so horrific that even veteran law enforcement officers struggled to process it. In a crib in the bedroom lay 10-month-old Margaret Schlosser, called Maggie by her family. The baby was deceased. Dena had used a kitchen knife to amputate both of the infant's arms at the shoulder. Maggie had bled to death in her crib. Officers found the knife on the floor, still covered in blood. Dena appeared completely detached from reality. She showed no emotion, no understanding of the magnitude of what she had done. She spoke about the devil and salvation, about sacrifice and purity. She believed she had freed her daughter from sin. The investigation quickly revealed a deeply troubling pattern of missed warning signs and systemic failures. Dena Schlosser had a documented history of severe mental illness, including bipolar disorder and postpartum psychosis with religious delusions. Just months before Maggie's death, Child Protective Services had removed Dena's 2 older daughters from the home after Dena attempted to harm herself. CPS workers found Dena sitting in a closet, repeatedly saying she wanted to give herself to God. The children were placed with relatives while Dena received psychiatric treatment. After a short hospitalization, Dena appeared to stabilize. Mental health professionals cleared her. CPS returned the children to her care. It was a fatal mistake. What authorities didn't fully understand was that Dena had stopped taking her psychiatric medications. Her husband, John Schlosser, worked long hours and later stated he didn't fully comprehend the severity of his wife's mental illness. He thought she was getting better, but Dena was getting worse. In the weeks leading up to Maggie's death, Dena's behavior became increasingly erratic. She spoke constantly about demons, about her unworthiness before God, about needing to make sacrifices. She became obsessed with a particular Bible passage from the Gospel of Matthew. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. Dena interpreted this passage literally. In her psychotic mind, she believed Maggie's arms were causing the baby to sin, and that cutting them off would save her daughter's soul. On the morning of November 22nd, Dena's 2 older daughters were at school. John was at work. Dena was alone with baby Maggie. That's when she acted on her delusion. She took Maggie to the bedroom, laid her in the crib, and used a kitchen knife to amputate both of the baby's arms. Then she turned on gospel music and waited. When police arrived hours later, Dena appeared to be in a state of religious ecstasy, believing she had done something holy. Dena was arrested and charged with capital murder. Her case went to trial in February 2006. The central issue, as in other cases, was her mental state at the time of the killing. The defense presented overwhelming evidence of Dena's severe mental illness. Psychiatrists testified that Dena was experiencing active psychosis when she killed Maggie. She genuinely believed she was performing a religious act that would save her daughter's soul. She was unable to distinguish right from wrong. The prosecution presented Dena as someone who knew what she was doing and should be held accountable. They emphasized the horrific nature of the crime and the suffering of innocent baby Maggie. After hearing all the evidence, the jury reached a verdict: not guilty by reason of insanity. Dena Schlosser was committed to North Texas State Hospital for psychiatric treatment. The Schlosser case exposed critical gaps in the mental health and child welfare systems. Child Protective Services faced intense scrutiny for returning Dena's children to her care despite her documented psychiatric problems and recent crisis. The case led to policy reviews and reforms in how Texas handles cases involving parents with serious mental illness. In 2008, a state district judge ruled that Dena could be transferred to a less restrictive facility after psychiatrists testified she had responded well to medication and treatment. In 2010, she was granted outpatient status, allowed to live in a group home under supervision. The decision outraged many who believed Dena should remain hospitalized indefinitely. Victim advocates argued that the severity of her crime warranted lifetime institutionalization. But mental health experts noted that with proper medication and treatment, individuals who commit crimes during psychotic episodes can stabilize and cease to be a danger. Maggie Schlosser was only 10 months old when she died. She never got to take her first steps, say her first words, or celebrate her first birthday. She died in unimaginable pain, killed by the person who should have protected her most. Dena Schlosser's case shows us that mental health treatment cannot be optional when children's lives are at stake. The system failed Maggie. If these deep investigations matter to you, please subscribe to Cold Case Hour, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on what should have been done differently. Your engagement helps us continue this important work. Case 4, Melissa Towne. October 2nd, 2022. Houston, Texas, Harris County. On Sunday morning, October 2nd, 2022, Houston emergency responders received a frantic call about an unresponsive child. When they arrived at the home in northwest Harris County, they found 5-year-old Nicole, who also went by the name Chanel, deceased in her bedroom. The kindergartner had suffered fatal injuries. The child's mother, 37-year-old Melissa Towne, was present at the scene but appeared confused and disconnected from reality. As investigators pieced together what happened, a horrifying picture emerged. Melissa had taken her daughter's life during what psychiatrists would later identify as a severe psychotic episode. Little Nicole had been suffocated and suffered a fatal injury to her neck. The scene suggested a violent struggle, and the child's small body bore evidence of the trauma she endured before death. Melissa Towne had no prior criminal history. She had been regarded by those who knew her as a caring, involved mother. Nicole was a bright, happy child who loved to dance, draw pictures, and play with her toys. There had been no previous reports of abuse or neglect. However, as investigators dug deeper, a troubling picture emerged. Family members later revealed that in the months leading up to the tragedy, Melissa had been struggling significantly. She had recently experienced multiple major life stressors, including financial difficulties, housing instability, and relationship problems. Those close to Melissa noticed changes in her behavior. She seemed withdrawn and anxious. She stopped reaching out to friends. She isolated herself and Nicole. But nobody recognized these as warning signs of the mental health crisis brewing beneath the surface. On the morning of October 2nd, something in Melissa's mind snapped. She later told psychiatric evaluators that she experienced terrifying delusions that morning. She believed that malevolent forces, evil people, or entities were coming for her daughter. In her fractured perception of reality, she believed these forces would torture Nicole, would make her suffer eternally. In Melissa's psychotic mind, the only way to protect Nicole from this terrible fate was to take her life quickly, before the evil forces could arrive. She genuinely believed she was saving her daughter from something far worse than death. After the attack, Melissa called for help, but it was too late. Nicole was pronounced dead at the scene. Melissa was arrested and charged with capital murder, one of the most serious charges in Texas law, carrying potential punishment of life in prison without parole or even the death penalty. The case proceeded slowly through the legal system as multiple psychiatrists evaluated Melissa's mental state. The evaluations took months. Experts needed to determine whether Melissa was competent to stand trial and whether she had been legally insane at the time of Nicole's death. The psychiatric evaluations revealed that Melissa had experienced a sudden-onset psychotic episode on October 2nd. Multiple experts concluded that she had suffered a complete break from reality characterized by paranoid delusions and command hallucinations. She had no previous documented history of mental illness severe enough to warrant hospitalization, making the sudden onset of psychosis particularly tragic and difficult to predict. Melissa's case went to trial in 2023. Her defense team presented compelling psychiatric evidence. Expert witnesses explained how psychotic breaks can occur suddenly, without warning, particularly in individuals under extreme stress. They testified about Melissa's genuine belief that she was protecting Nicole, about her complete detachment from reality during the incident. Family members testified that Melissa had been a loving, attentive mother who would never have harmed Nicole if she had been in her right mind. They described the close bond between mother and daughter, the way Melissa doted on her little girl. The prosecution emphasized the life lost. They presented evidence of Nicole's injuries, the violence of the attack, the trauma the 5-year-old experienced in her final moments. They reminded the jury that a child with her whole future ahead of her had been taken by the person who should have protected her most. After hearing all the evidence and deliberating, the jury returned a verdict, not guilty by reason of insanity. Melissa Towne was committed to a state psychiatric hospital, where she would receive treatment for her mental illness and remain confined until mental health professionals determined she was no longer a danger to herself or others. The verdict meant Melissa would not go to prison, but she would not be free either. She would spend years, possibly decades, in a psychiatric facility, living with the knowledge of what she did, even though she wasn't in control at the time. The case received less national media attention than other high-profile cases, but it was equally devastating for those involved. Nicole's father and extended family members were left to grieve the loss of a beloved child. They had to grapple with the reality that Melissa, someone they had known and trusted, had taken Nicole's life. Mental health advocates pointed to the Towne case as another example of the critical need for better mental health screening and resources, particularly for parents under significant stress. The tragedy illustrated how quickly a mental health crisis can escalate, and how difficult it can be to recognize the warning signs before it's too late. 5-year-old Nicole deserved to grow up. She deserved to start elementary school, make friends, learn to read, and discover who she would become. Instead, her life was cut short in the most tragic way imaginable. Melissa Towne remains in psychiatric care, where she must live every day with the unbearable knowledge of what happened on October 2, 2022. Nicole's story reminds us that mental health crises can strike anyone, even people with no prior history of severe mental illness. If you're moved by these investigations and want to support our mission to tell these stories thoroughly and respectfully, please hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with others who follow true crime. Drop a comment with your thoughts. This is Cold Case Hour. Case 5, Kimberly Dawn Trenor. July 24, 2007. Spring, Texas, Galveston County. In October 2007, a fisherman made a disturbing discovery in Galveston Bay. Floating in the water, inside a plastic storage container, was the body of a small child. The toddler was later identified as 2-year-old Riley Sawyers. Riley had been dead for months. Her tiny body had been placed in the container and dumped into the bay like garbage. But this wasn't a stranger abduction or a random act of violence. Riley had been killed by the two people who should have protected her most: her mother, Kimberly Dawn Trenor, and her stepfather, Royce Clyde Ziegler II. The case of Riley Sawyers, who became known in media reports as Baby Grace before she was identified, shocked the nation and exposed one of the most brutal cases of child abuse in Texas history. Riley Sawyers was born in Ohio but lived with her mother Kimberly and stepfather Royce in Spring, Texas, a suburb north of Houston. From the outside, they appeared to be a normal family. But inside their home, 2-year-old Riley was subjected to horrific abuse. On July 24, 2007, Riley was beaten to death. According to later confessions and evidence presented at trial, Kimberly and Royce subjected the toddler to brutal physical abuse for allegedly resisting bathroom training and for other minor childhood behaviors. They beat Riley repeatedly. Riley's biological father, who lived in Ohio, was devastated when he learned what happened to his daughter. He had been trying to locate Riley and regain custody, but Kimberly had moved to Texas and cut off contact. The Riley Sawyers case led to changes in how Texas handles missing children cases and highlighted the importance of family members staying vigilant and reporting concerns when children disappear from their lives. Both Kimberly Trenor and Royce Ziegler remain in Texas prisons, where they will spend the rest of their lives. Riley Sawyers, Baby Grace, is buried in a cemetery where people who never knew her come to leave flowers and teddy bears, remembering a little girl whose life mattered. Riley Sawyers deserved so much better than what she got. If you suspect a child is being abused, please report it. Call Child Protective Services. Call law enforcement. You could save a life. If you want to support investigations like this that honor victims and examine how these tragedies happen, please subscribe to Cold Case Hour, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Tell us in the comments what you think about this case. Case 6, Laquita Lewis. June 18, 2017. Houston, Texas, Harris County. On the afternoon of June 18, 2017, Houston police received a disturbing call from a woman who said she had just killed her daughter. When officers arrived at the apartment complex in southwest Houston, they found 34-year-old Laquita Lewis covered in blood. Inside the apartment, officers discovered 4-year-old Frederica Allen, called Freddie by family, deceased from multiple stab wounds. The little girl had been attacked with a knife and died at the scene. Laquita was immediately taken into custody. She confessed to killing her daughter, but appeared to be in a state of severe psychological distress. She made incoherent statements to officers, suggesting she was experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. As investigators looked into Laquita's background, they discovered she had a history of mental health struggles. Family members reported that Laquita had been diagnosed with depression and had been prescribed psychiatric medications in the past. However, she had a pattern of stopping her medications when she felt better, a common but dangerous behavior among people with mental illness. In the weeks before Frederica's death, Laquita's behavior had become increasingly erratic and concerning. She had expressed paranoid thoughts and made strange statements to family members. Some relatives noticed she seemed detached and was not caring for Frederica properly. However, nobody intervened or reported concerns to Child Protective Services. On June 18th, Laquita experienced what appeared to be a psychotic break. According to later psychiatric evaluations, she believed that evil forces were threatening her daughter and that Frederica was in grave danger. In her distorted reality, Laquita convinced herself that the only way to protect Frederica was to take her life. Laquita attacked Frederica with a knife, stabbing the 4-year-old multiple times. After Frederica died, Laquita called 911 and confessed to what she had done. Laquita Lewis was charged with murder. Her case proceeded through the legal system with extensive psychiatric evaluation. Multiple mental health experts examined her and reviewed her history. The evaluations revealed that Laquita had been experiencing active psychosis at the time of Frederica's death. She had paranoid delusions and genuinely believed she was protecting her daughter from a terrible threat. The experts concluded that Laquita did not understand the wrongfulness of her actions at the time due to her severe mental illness. In 2018, Laquita's case went to trial. Her defense team presented the psychiatric evidence, arguing that Laquita was legally insane when she killed Frederica. They emphasized her history of mental illness, her pattern of going off medications, and the severity of her psychotic symptoms on the day of the killing. The prosecution acknowledged Laquita's mental health issues, but argued that she should still be held criminally responsible. They focused on the victim, a 4-year-old girl who died violently at the hands of her own mother. The jury heard all the evidence and deliberated. They returned with a verdict of guilty but mentally ill, and Laquita was sentenced to a lengthy prison term with the provision that she would receive psychiatric treatment while incarcerated. The verdict was a compromise of sorts, acknowledging Laquita's mental illness while also holding her accountable for taking her daughter's life. She would serve time in prison but would receive medication and mental health care during her incarceration. Frederica Allen was only 4 years old when she died. She was a sweet, energetic child who loved to play dress-up and watch cartoons. Her extended family was devastated by her death and struggled to understand how Laquita could have done such a thing. The case highlighted once again the critical importance of consistent mental health treatment and the dangers of going off psychiatric medications. It also raised questions about when family members should intervene when they see concerning behavior from parents with mental illness. Frederica's father, who had a strained relationship with Laquita, was heartbroken by the loss of his daughter. He had been trying to maintain contact with Frederica, but faced obstacles due to his complicated situation with Laquita. After Frederica's death, he expressed regret that he hadn't pushed harder to get his daughter into a safer environment. Mental health advocates used the Lewis case to emphasize the importance of medication compliance among people with serious mental illness, particularly parents. They pointed out that many people with conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or other psychotic disorders feel better when they take their medications, and then mistakenly believe they no longer need them. This pattern of stopping medications often leads to relapses and, in tragic cases like this one, violence. The case also illustrated gaps in the mental health care system. Laquita had been diagnosed and treated in the past, but there was no effective system in place to ensure she continued taking her medications or to monitor her condition. Family members noticed her deteriorating mental state, but didn't know how to intervene or didn't realize the severity of the danger. Laquita Lewis remains incarcerated in Texas, receiving psychiatric treatment while serving her sentence. She will likely spend many years, possibly the rest of her life, behind bars. Unlike defendants found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to psychiatric hospitals, Laquita was convicted and sentenced to prison, though her mental illness was recognized as a factor in the crime. 4-year-old Frederica Allen is buried in Houston. At her funeral, family members remembered a little girl full of joy and energy, a child who brightened every room she entered. They mourned not just her death, but all the moments they would never share with her. Her first day of kindergarten, her elementary school years, her growing up. Frederica deserved to be safe. Her case shows us that mental health treatment must be consistent and that families need better support systems when a loved one is struggling. If you're learning from these investigations, please subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Give this video a thumbs up and hit that notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments about what could have prevented this tragedy. Case 7. Jenea Mungia. February 26, 2015. Houston, Texas, Harris County. In the early morning hours of February 26, 2015, Houston police received a call from a woman who said something terrible had happened to her son. When officers arrived at the apartment in southeast Houston, they found 33-year-old Jenea Mungia in a state of extreme distress. Jenea's young son had been stabbed. The boy, whose name was withheld from most media coverage to protect his identity, had suffered serious stab wounds. Emergency responders rushed him to Texas Children's Hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save his life. Miraculously, the child survived his injuries, though he would carry physical and emotional scars from the attack. Jenea was immediately arrested and charged with injury to a child. As investigators worked the case, the horrifying reality became clear. Jenea had stabbed her own son during what appeared to be a severe mental health crisis. During initial questioning, Jenea appeared disconnected from reality. She made bizarre statements to officers and seemed confused about what had happened. She showed signs of severe mental illness, including disorganized thinking, paranoid ideation, and possible hallucinations. As the investigation continued, authorities learned more about Jenea's background and mental health history. Family members revealed that Jenea had been struggling with mental health issues for some time. She had been experiencing increasing anxiety and paranoia in the months leading up to the attack. Some relatives reported that Jenea had expressed strange beliefs and fears. She had talked about people trying to harm her and her son. She seemed to believe she was being watched or followed. These are classic symptoms of paranoid psychosis, but family members didn't fully understand the severity of what they were witnessing. On the morning of February 26th, Jenea experienced a complete psychotic break. According to later psychiatric evaluations, she was experiencing paranoid delusions and may have believed her son was in danger from external threats. In her fractured mental state, her thoughts became so distorted that she attacked the child she was trying to protect. After stabbing her son, Jenea called for help. The fact that she called emergency services suggested some level of awareness that something was terribly wrong, though she was clearly not in her right mind. The legal proceedings in Jenea's case took considerable time as she underwent extensive psychiatric evaluation. Multiple mental health experts examined her, reviewed her history, and assessed her mental state at the time of the attack. The psychiatric evaluations revealed that Jenea had been experiencing a severe psychotic episode when she stabbed her son. She had paranoid delusions and was completely out of touch with reality. The experts concluded that she was legally insane at the time of the offense, unable to understand that what she was doing was wrong. When Jenea's case finally went to trial, the defense presented compelling psychiatric evidence. Expert witnesses explained the nature of Jenea's mental illness, how psychotic breaks manifest, and why Jenea genuinely believed she was responding to a threat rather than creating one. The prosecution acknowledged the seriousness of Jenea's mental illness, but emphasized that a child had been seriously injured and traumatized by his own mother's actions. They argued that regardless of her mental state, the attack had lasting consequences for the victim. After hearing all the testimony and reviewing the evidence, the jury reached a verdict: not guilty by reason of insanity. Jenea Mungia was committed to a state psychiatric hospital for treatment rather than being sent to prison. The verdict meant that Jenea would receive intensive mental health treatment in a secure facility. She would remain there until mental health professionals determined she was stable, properly medicated, and no longer posed a danger to herself or others. This could take years or even decades. The case was particularly difficult because the victim survived. Unlike other cases where children died, this case involved a young boy who had to recover from both physical wounds and the psychological trauma of being attacked by his mother. The child was placed in the care of relatives who would help him heal and provide the stable, safe environment he needed. Mental health experts who reviewed the case noted that Jenea's attack on her son, while horrifying, was consistent with the behavior of someone experiencing severe paranoid psychosis. People in psychotic states sometimes harm the very people they love most, believing they are protecting them or responding to threats that don't actually exist. The Mungia case illustrated once again how quickly mental health crises can escalate to violence and the critical importance of recognizing warning signs of psychosis. Family members who noticed Jenea's strange behavior didn't realize they were witnessing symptoms of a serious mental illness that required immediate intervention. Jenea Mungia remains in psychiatric care, receiving treatment for her mental illness. Her son, thankfully, survived and is being raised by family members who love him and are helping him process the trauma of what happened. Unlike the other cases in this investigation where children died, this case offers a glimmer of hope. The child survived, and with proper care and support, both mother and son may eventually heal, though their relationship will forever be changed by the events of February 26, 2015. The Mungia case reminds us that mental health crises can escalate rapidly and that early intervention is critical. If you see someone experiencing paranoid thoughts, hallucinations, or bizarre behavior, please encourage them to seek professional help immediately. If you're invested in these deep investigations, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, hit the like button, and turn on those notifications. Tell us in the comments what you think should be done to prevent cases like this. Case 8. Gloria Yvette Williams. November 2020. Houston, Texas, Harris County. On October 24, 2021, Houston police received a call that would lead them to one of the most disturbing cases of child neglect and abuse in recent Texas history. A 15-year-old boy, malnourished and desperate, had managed to escape from an apartment in West Houston and flagged down a neighbor for help. When officers arrived at the apartment in the West Park Tollway area, what they found inside was a scene of unimaginable horror. The apartment was in deplorable condition, trash, feces, and filth everywhere. But the most disturbing discovery was in one of the bedrooms. 8-year-old Kendrick Lee, skeletal and deceased, lay in the room where he had been for nearly a year. The boy's body was severely decomposed. His siblings, 3 boys ages 7, 10, and 15, had been living in the apartment with their brother's corpse for approximately 10 to 12 months. The children's mother, 35-year-old Gloria Yvette Williams, had been aware that Kendrick was dead but had done nothing. She had not called police, not reported his death, not buried him. She had simply left him there and continued living in the apartment with her surviving sons. The investigation revealed a pattern of severe neglect that had been ongoing for years. The 3 surviving brothers were found to be malnourished, traumatized, and living in conditions that shocked even veteran investigators. The 15-year-old who escaped and called for help likely saved his younger brothers' lives. According to the investigation, Kendrick had died in or around November 2020, nearly a year before his body was discovered. The exact circumstances of his death were difficult to determine due to the advanced state of decomposition, but evidence suggested he had been severely neglected and malnourished before he died. Gloria Williams and her boyfriend, 31-year-old Brian Coulter, were both arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including injury to a child and tampering with evidence. Gloria was charged with murder in connection with Kendrick's death. The details that emerged during the investigation were heartbreaking. The children had been isolated from the outside world. They weren't attending school. They had little food and were often left alone for extended periods. When Kendrick died, Gloria and Brian allegedly told the other children not to tell anyone and continued living in the apartment as if nothing had happened. The surviving brothers told investigators that they had known their brother was dead but were too afraid to tell anyone. The 15-year-old finally worked up the courage to escape and seek help, leading to the discovery of Kendrick's body and the rescue of the younger brothers. The case raised serious questions about how such severe neglect could go unnoticed for so long. The children had previously been known to Child Protective Services. CPS had investigated the family in the past, but had closed the case. Neighbors reported occasionally seeing children at the apartment, but didn't realize the extent of the abuse and neglect happening inside. Gloria Williams was charged with murder by omission, meaning that her failure to provide care, seek medical attention, or report Kendrick's death constituted criminal responsibility for his death. She was also charged with injury to a child and tampering with evidence, human remains. Brian Coulter was charged with murder as well, along with multiple counts of injury to a child related to the abuse of the surviving brothers. As of the time of this investigation, both Gloria Williams and Brian Coulter are awaiting trial. The legal proceedings have been ongoing, with both defendants facing potential life sentences if convicted of the murder charge. The 3 surviving brothers were placed in foster care and are receiving intensive therapy and medical treatment. They face a long road to recovery, both physically and emotionally, from the trauma they experienced. 8-year-old Kendrick Lee died alone and neglected. His body lay undiscovered for nearly a year, while his brothers were forced to live with the knowledge that their brother was dead in the next room. The trauma these children experienced is almost impossible to comprehend. The Williams case is different from other cases in this investigation because it involves extreme neglect and abandonment rather than a single violent act. Gloria didn't kill Kendrick in a moment of psychosis or rage. She allowed him to die through neglect, then concealed his death for nearly a year while continuing to subject his brothers to abuse and deprivation. Mental health experts have noted that Gloria may have been suffering from severe depression, substance abuse issues, or other mental health problems that contributed to her inability to care for her children. However, unlike cases where mothers are found not guilty by reason of insanity, Gloria's case appears to involve a prolonged pattern of neglect and concealment rather than a psychotic episode. The case shocked Houston and the nation when it came to light in late 2021. It raised urgent questions about child welfare, the effectiveness of CPS interventions, and how to identify children who are being hidden from view and subjected to abuse. Kendrick Lee and his brothers deserved so much better. This case shows us that child abuse sometimes happens in plain sight, behind closed doors where nobody thinks to look. If you suspect a child is being neglected or abused, please report it. You could save a life. If you want to support investigations that shine a light on these cases, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Share your thoughts in the comments on what needs to change. Case 9, Oninda Romelus. October 4th, 2025. Angleton, Texas, Brazoria County. This is the most recent case in our investigation, and details are still emerging as the legal process unfolds. On the evening of October 4th, 2025, Angleton police received multiple 911 calls reporting gunshots near a vehicle on a rural road in Brazoria County, about 40 miles south of Houston. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered a horrific situation. Inside a Dodge Magnum parked near the road were 4 children who had been shot multiple times. 2 of the children, a 13-year-old and a 3-year-old, were deceased. 2 other children were critically injured but alive. The children's mother, 35-year-old Oninda Romelus, was found at the scene in a state of severe psychological distress. Evidence indicated that she had shot all 4 of her children before law enforcement arrived. Emergency responders rushed the 2 surviving children to nearby hospitals, where they underwent emergency surgery for gunshot wounds. Both children survived their physical injuries but faced a long recovery and must now process the unimaginable trauma of being shot by their own mother and losing their siblings. Oninda was immediately arrested at the scene and charged with 2 counts of capital murder and 2 counts of attempted capital murder. She was taken into custody and held without bond. As investigators worked to understand what had happened, a disturbing picture began to emerge. According to preliminary reports and witness statements, Oninda had driven her 4 children to the isolated rural location specifically to carry out the attack. This wasn't a spontaneous act. She had planned where to take them. Family members and neighbors were shocked by what happened. Those who knew Oninda described her as a loving mother who cared for her children. However, some people close to the family later reported that Oninda had been exhibiting signs of mental distress in the weeks and months before the shooting. According to early reports, Oninda had been experiencing increasing anxiety and paranoia. She had made statements to some family members suggesting she feared for her children's safety, though the nature of these fears remained unclear. Some relatives noticed she seemed increasingly withdrawn and isolated. On October 4th, Oninda's fears and delusions apparently reached a breaking point. According to initial psychiatric evaluations, she may have believed her children were in imminent danger from external threats, though investigators found no evidence of any actual danger to the family. In a state of what appeared to be severe psychosis, Oninda drove her children to the remote location in Brazoria County and opened fire. She shot each child multiple times. Witnesses who heard the gunshots and called 911 reported seeing a woman in distress near a vehicle. When police arrived, Oninda was still at the scene. She was taken into custody without incident. During initial questioning, she made statements suggesting she believed she had been protecting her children from some terrible fate, though her statements were often incoherent and difficult to follow. Oninda Romelus is currently being held in the Brazoria County Jail awaiting trial. She is undergoing extensive psychiatric evaluation to determine her competency to stand trial and to assess her mental state at the time of the shooting. Her defense attorneys are expected to pursue an insanity defense, arguing that Oninda was experiencing a severe psychotic break when she shot her children and genuinely believed she was protecting them from harm. Psychiatric experts are evaluating whether she was capable of understanding the wrongfulness of her actions. The prosecution faces the challenging task of seeking justice for 2 murdered children and 2 who narrowly survived, while navigating the complex legal and ethical questions surrounding mental illness and criminal responsibility. Because this case is so recent, occurring just months ago, many details remain unknown or protected as part of the ongoing legal process. The names of the 4 children have been largely withheld from public reporting to protect the privacy of the 2 survivors. The Brazoria County community has rallied around the surviving children and extended family members. Local churches and organizations have organized fundraisers to help with medical expenses for the injured children and funeral costs for those who died. Vigils have been held to honor the victims and support the family. This case is still actively moving through the legal system. Oninda's trial is likely months or possibly years away. As with other cases, the central questions remain. Was she legally insane at the time of the shooting? Could this tragedy have been prevented? What warning signs were missed? The 2 children who died in this attack were 13 and 3 years old, one just entering their teenage years, the other barely starting life. They deserved to grow up, to have futures, to be safe. Instead, their lives were cut short by their mother on a rural road in Brazoria County. The 2 surviving children face a long physical and emotional recovery. They must heal from gunshot wounds while processing the traumatic reality that their mother shot them and killed their siblings. They will need years of therapy and support to have any hope of recovering from such profound trauma. As this case continues to develop, Cold Case Hour will follow the proceedings and provide updates as more information becomes available. The Romelus case is still unfolding, and there's much we don't yet know. What we do know is that 2 children lost their lives and 2 others nearly died. If you want to stay updated on this case and others like it, make sure you're subscribed to Cold Case Hour with notifications turned on. Give this video a thumbs up and let us know in the comments what you think about these recent tragedies. Your engagement helps us continue this important work. Case 10. Melissa Elizabeth Lucio. February 17, 2007. Harlingen, Texas, Cameron County. The case of Melissa Elizabeth Lucio is unique in this investigation because it remains deeply controversial, with many people, including legal experts, advocacy groups, and even some of the original jurors, now questioning whether Melissa is actually guilty of the crime for which she was convicted. On February 17, 2007, paramedics were called to an apartment in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley near the Mexico border. 2-year-old Mariah Alvarez was unresponsive. Emergency responders rushed her to the hospital, but tragically, Mariah died from her injuries. The medical examiner determined that Mariah had died from blunt force trauma to her head. She had multiple bruises and injuries on her body. Investigators immediately suspected abuse and focused their attention on Melissa Lucio, Mariah's mother. Melissa, a 40-year-old mother of 14 children, had a difficult life marked by poverty, domestic violence, and substance abuse. She had a history with Child Protective Services, and some of her older children had been removed from her care at various times. When police interrogated Melissa about Mariah's death, the questioning lasted for hours. Melissa, exhausted and traumatized by her daughter's death, eventually made statements that prosecutors interpreted as a confession. She said things like, "I guess I did it," when pressed repeatedly about whether she had hurt Mariah. Melissa was arrested and charged with capital murder. Her trial took place in 2008 in Cameron County. The prosecution presented the medical evidence of Mariah's injuries and Melissa's statements to police as proof that she had beaten her daughter to death. The jury found Melissa guilty of capital murder and sentenced her to death. Melissa Lucio became one of only a handful of women on death row in Texas. But in the years since her conviction, serious questions have emerged about the case. Melissa's defense team argues that she is innocent and that Mariah's death was actually a tragic accident, not murder. According to the defense, Mariah had fallen down a steep flight of stairs 2 days before her death. In the hours after the fall, she seemed okay, so Melissa didn't immediately seek medical treatment. But Mariah's condition deteriorated, and she eventually died from internal injuries caused by the fall, not from abuse. The defense points out that many of the bruises on Mariah's body were consistent with a fall downstairs. They also note that Melissa had no history of seriously physically abusing her children, despite her many struggles. Perhaps most importantly, experts have raised serious concerns about Melissa's interrogation and her so-called confession. Melissa was interrogated for over 5 hours in the middle of the night, just hours after her daughter died. She was grieving, exhausted, and vulnerable. Psychological experts who have reviewed the interrogation tapes say that Melissa's statements were not a genuine confession, but rather the result of coercive interrogation techniques. When someone is interrogated for hours using high-pressure tactics, they sometimes make statements just to end the interrogation, even if those statements aren't true. This is especially common among people who have experienced trauma, domestic violence, and abuse, all of which apply to Melissa. Additionally, some experts have questioned the medical evidence. They argue that the injuries attributed to abuse could actually be explained by the fall down the stairs, and that the medical examiner's conclusions were not as certain as the prosecution suggested. In the years since Melissa's conviction, a growing movement has formed calling for her case to be reconsidered. Advocacy groups, legal organizations, and even bipartisan groups of lawmakers have questioned whether Melissa received a fair trial and whether she is actually guilty. In 2022, Melissa came within 2 days of being executed. Her execution was scheduled for April 27, 2022. But just 48 hours before she was set to be put to death, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals granted a stay of execution. The court ordered a lower court to review new evidence in her case, including expert testimony about the interrogation and alternative explanations for Mariah's injuries. The stay of execution was a major development, giving Melissa and her legal team more time to fight for her freedom. As of now, January 2026, Melissa Lucio remains on death row, but her case is under review. The Melissa Lucio case is different from every other case in this investigation. In all the other cases, there is little doubt that the mothers committed the crimes. The legal question was about their mental state and criminal responsibility. But in Melissa's case, the fundamental question is, did she actually kill her daughter, or was Mariah's death a tragic accident? If Melissa is innocent, as her supporters believe, then she has spent nearly 2 decades on death row for a crime she didn't commit, sentenced to die for the accidental death of her child, compounded by a coerced confession obtained during a traumatic interrogation. If she is guilty, as the original jury concluded, then she belongs in prison for taking her daughter's life. The truth remains uncertain. What is clear is that 2-year-old Mariah Alvarez died tragically in 2007, and her death has raised profound questions about justice, interrogation tactics, false confessions, and the death penalty. Melissa's case has brought attention to issues of wrongful convictions, particularly in cases involving mothers accused of harming their children. It has sparked debate about how police interrogate suspects, how medical evidence is interpreted, and how the criminal justice system handles complex cases involving poverty, trauma, and family dysfunction. Mariah Alvarez deserved to grow up. She was only 2 years old when she died, whether from abuse or from a fall down the stairs. Her short life was marked by the poverty and instability that affected her entire family. Melissa Lucio's fate remains undetermined. She sits on death row, awaiting a decision from the courts that will determine whether she will be executed, granted a new trial, or possibly exonerated. The Melissa Lucio case reminds us that not everything is black and white, and that we must carefully examine the evidence before taking a life. Whether you believe Melissa is guilty or innocent, her case raises important questions about our justice system. If you want to follow developments in this case and others, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Tell us in the comments what you think about this controversial case. Conclusion: understanding the unthinkable. We've examined 10 cases from across Texas spanning nearly a quarter century. 10 mothers, 24 children lost. Each case unique, yet all sharing common threads of tragedy, mental illness, and devastating loss. Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children during a severe psychotic episode, believing she was saving their souls. Deanna Laney bludgeoned her sons with rocks, convinced God commanded her to do so. Dena Schlosser amputated her baby daughter's arms in a religious delusion. Towne suffocated her 5-year-old during a sudden psychotic break. Kimberly Trenor and her husband tortured and killed little Riley and Sawyers, whose body was dumped in Galveston Bay. Laquita stabbed her 4-year-old daughter to death during a mental health crisis. Jenea Mungia stabbed her young son, but he survived. Gloria Williams allowed her 8-year-old son to die from neglect, then left his body to decompose while his brothers lived in horror. Oninda Romelus shot all 4 of her children in a vehicle, killing 2 and critically injuring 2 others. And Lucio was convicted and sentenced to death for her daughter's death, though serious questions remain about whether she's actually guilty. These cases force us to confront uncomfortable questions about motherhood, mental illness, criminal responsibility, and justice. What have we learned? First, severe mental illness, particularly postpartum psychosis and other psychotic disorders, can be deadly. Many of the mothers in these cases were experiencing complete breaks from reality. They heard voices, saw visions, believed delusions that drove them to commit unthinkable acts. With proper treatment, many of these tragedies could have been prevented. Second, the warning signs were often there, but went unrecognized or ignored. Family members noticed strange behavior, paranoid statements, withdrawal, and deteriorating mental health. But they didn't understand what they were seeing, didn't know how to intervene, or didn't realize the severity of the danger. Third, our mental health and child welfare systems have significant gaps. Mothers fell through the cracks. Medications were discontinued. Follow-up care was inadequate. Children were returned to dangerous situations. The system failed to protect the most vulnerable. Fourth, not all of these cases involved mental illness. Some, like the Riley and Sawyers case, involved deliberate cruelty and abuse. Some, like the Gloria Williams case, involved horrific neglect and concealment. Mental illness doesn't explain everything. Fifth, the legal system struggles with these cases. How do we balance accountability for devastating crimes with recognition of severe mental illness? When is someone truly insane in the legal sense? Different juries reached different conclusions in similar cases, showing how difficult these questions are. What can be done? We need better postpartum mental health screening and support. Every new mother should be carefully monitored for signs of postpartum depression and psychosis. When symptoms appear, intervention must be immediate and aggressive. We need to educate the public about warning signs of severe mental illness. Paranoid statements, religious delusions, hallucinations, bizarre behavior. These aren't just eccentricities. They're medical emergencies, especially when children are involved. We need systems to ensure people with serious mental illness continue taking their medications. Too many people stop their medications when they feel better, not understanding that the medications are why they feel better. We need child protective services with adequate resources, training, and support to identify danger and protect children. CPS workers are often overworked and under-resourced, making it difficult for them to effectively monitor at-risk families. We need to remove the stigma around mental illness so that people feel comfortable seeking help before crisis strikes. Too many suffer in silence because they're ashamed or afraid of judgment. Remembering the victims: Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary Yates, Joshua and Luke Laney, Margaret Schlosser, Nicole Towne, Riley and Sawyers, Frederica Allen, Kendrick Lee, the 4 children of Oninda Romelus, Mariah Alvarez. These weren't just names in news reports or case files. They were real children with personalities, with favorite toys and favorite foods, with smiles and laughs and dreams. They deserved to grow up. They deserved to be safe. They deserved so much more than the endings they got. As we close this investigation, we remember them. We honor their lives by telling their stories, by advocating for changes that might prevent future tragedies, and by refusing to forget. Thank you for watching this investigation. I know these cases are difficult to hear. They're disturbing, heartbreaking, and they challenge our understanding of how mothers could harm their own children. But these stories need to be told. These children deserve to be remembered. And by understanding how these tragedies happened, maybe, just maybe, we can help prevent future ones. If you found this investigation valuable, if you believe these stories matter, please subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Hit that like button. Turn on notifications so you never miss an investigation. Share this video with others who follow true crime and care about child safety and mental health awareness. Most importantly, drop a comment below. Tell us what you think. What stood out to you? What should change? What can we do as a society to protect vulnerable children? Your engagement helps us continue this important work and keeps these conversations going. If you see someone struggling, a new mother who seems overwhelmed, a friend making concerning statements, a neighbor whose children seem neglected, please reach out. Offer help. Make the call. Report your concerns. You could save a life. This is Cold Case Hour. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about these stories. Thank you for helping us make sure these children are never forgotten. All right, before you go, let me ask you something. If you watch this entire video, that means you're clearly into deep dive true crime content like this. Am I right? Here's the thing. We post videos like this every single week, covering the cases that deserve more attention. The disturbing ones. The unsolved ones. The ones that'll keep you up at night. So if you don't want to miss the next investigation, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Not later, right now, while you're thinking about it. Because I guarantee you'll forget, and then you'll miss our next case. Plus, subscribing tells YouTube to show you more content like this. So really, you're doing yourself a favor. Click subscribe. Do it now. I'll wait. Done? Perfect. Welcome to the community. Now go binge our other cases. I promise they're just as disturbing as this one. See you in the next investigation. Until next time, take care of each other. And if you're struggling, please reach out for help. You matter. Your life matters. And help is available.